I introduce to you Andrew Esquire. Andrew, what's up, homie?
Hey, I'm glad to be here, Hotep. Glad to be here. And the timing is crazy because, when I planned to talk to you about this tonight, I did not think we were going to have a verdict. I thought we were just going to be talking about what was going to happen, not exactly what happened. So this is like a crazy, timely conversation.
Yeah, a lot of people think that, this is grifting, like I planned this because the verdict and that. Now, we had planned this previously on this date that we planned to have this conversation about the trial. And it, like you said, it's just divine timing that they did the verdict today, the same day that we decided to do this conversation. Now, you've done a couple of videos on your channel covering the Derek Chauvin trial. Before we get into the verdict, would you like to go over some of those videos and some of the things that they entailed? Because I believe you called this.
Yes, I did predict this. Now, honestly, this went beyond my prediction, but I mean, my big prediction, which was there is so much pressure in this case. And I go through all the law in my videos. If you really want to understand the charges, which is huge for this case, because he was convicted guilty on all charges. You got to check out my video, Is It Murder? In that video, I break down all of the elements of the crimes he was eventually convicted for, two of which were murder, one of which was manslaughter, and exactly what those meant, exactly the types of crimes that are involved with those charges, and just the basics of what you have to understand about those charges, because they're not like we saw with OJ, with Casey Anthony, or with George Zimmerman. These were actually different charges, and they're much different than what we saw before. And actually, because of the way they were charged, it made it easier for the prosecution to come up with the W here where they failed in those other cases. So you've really got to check out my video if you want to see that explanation. My second video was on whether Judge Cahill made mistakes. Spoiler alert, he did make mistakes, but I'm not going to give it all away. If you want to check that out, look at that video. And that is still going to be relevant because this can be appealed. So all of those mistakes that I brought up in that video, which we'll talk about tonight, but they can be appealed. So those are all grounds for appeal when a judge makes a mistake in ruling one way or another within the case. So huge things there. But yes, I said that the effects that were going outside of the trial, and as a lawyer, I like to focus on the law, but I'm also not ignorant. I'm also not somebody who's looking at something in a vacuum, who's saying, you know what, we can just close off this courtroom and nothing else is happening outside of this courtroom, because that's just not the case. We live in 2021. I mean, there's so much social media, so much media, so much advertising, just all these pressures that are out, on normal jurors. And they influence the trial. They influence the judge. They influence the prosecutor. They influence the defense. And, we're going to get into that today. But I think that this is the most heavily influenced trial in history. I'll go out there on a limb and say that the outside influence on this trial decisively has been the greatest of any trial in history, because this is really the most modern case. There's no more modern murder trial than the Derek Chauvin trial. And not only that, but this trial has set a precedent for future cases and how they're going to go down.
I love that word, precedent.
Precedent, because you got to understand, there's legal precedent, and there's also just in terms of business, in terms of how things are done, in terms of how the media covers it, there's a precedent. And when they've established this precedent of here's what we're going to do, here's what we're going to come out and say in the media, here's the positions we're going to take, here's what congressmen are going to say. We'll get into Maxine Waters. I know we're going to get into Maxine Waters.
Yeah.
But, the fact that you have congressmen, getting out there and saying things on social media, that's something that didn't exist beforehand. And then, you can just get people amplifying that on social media to the point where there's no way that everybody in that courtroom hasn't heard it. And actually they demonstrated they did hear it. So, really crazy.
Yeah. You think the jury did hear that?
Come on. There's no way they didn't hear when a woman who is, I believe she was actually in Minneapolis when she said it, that, if we don't get a guilty verdict, that was what she said. If we don't get a guilty verdict for murder, making it clear that they don't want the guilty for manslaughter. No. If they don't get a guilty for murder, we should stay here on the streets and get more confrontational. That was the line that I heard, was more confrontational. And look, I don't know what more confrontational looks like, but I mean, if anything, that's a clear threat. And that was repeated by Judge Cahill and the defense attorney. They confirmed that they knew about it. So, I mean, if these guys know it and they've got no time, I mean, Nelson, the defense attorney, was saying all he does is this case. That's all he does, 24/7, but he's still got time to hear this. I mean, that's a lot, it's just breaking through all the barriers in this case and infecting everybody.
Yeah, that is the exact verbiage. She did call for people to get more confrontational. I actually want to play the video in a moment here once I get that pulled up. But first, can you just walk through the charges or what he was up for and exactly what those things meant?
Sure. I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. Like I said, you want the deep dive version, go check out my video, Is It Murder?
Right.
But Cliff Notes, there were 3, right? So there was manslaughter. Let's start at the bottom. Manslaughter is the lowest threshold. Pretty much, you're just looking at pretty much negligence almost at that point. So is there criminal levels of negligence? It's more than just civil negligence. So let's say that somebody wasn't paying attention and they bumped you and you fell over and skinned your knee. They'd be liable for negligence. No, this is like severe negligence. But that was the lowest level, easiest to convict. Now, the next level up from that was third-degree murder. Now, third-degree murder is a crazy charge because it's typically not used in this case. In fact, it initially was pulled off as a charge because it's so rare, it's so unused of a charge. So they pulled it off. But the appellate court ruled that they could put it back, the prosecution could put it back. The weird thing is that type of charge is really only used for stuff like Russian roulette or firing a gun randomly into a crowd, something where you hit somebody, but it's not really intended who, like if you're playing Russian roulette, somebody's going to die, but you don't know who it is. So it's sort of like an improbable death. So not really what we have here. We had 2 people that kind of knew who they were going to impact. It's not really the case. And the last one was second-degree unintentional murder. And that's important because there's 2 types of second-degree murder in Minnesota. There's intentional murder, which would, you'd have an intent. And then there's unintentional murder. But the unintentional murder, to be second degree, requires you to commit another crime. So that other crime would be assault, an unpermitted touching. So, for example, because he was on George Floyd and because it was unpermitted, that is the issue there. And there were 2 key problems that the prosecution had to overcome. And the reason why this is so shocking for everybody, especially anybody who knows anything about criminal defense, anybody who's ever seen these things overcome, where there were 2 huge hurdles which the prosecution had to overcome. First was the use of force, right? Because it is a defense if the use of force was authorized, which is why you saw the prosecution drag out pretty much an entire police department's worth of people as witnesses because they had to prove use of force. And we'll get into that. But that was one huge element, because if that had been there, it was authorized, all of it's out. The second one was causation. And that's, something that it sounds like a lawyer word, but what it really means is that did Derek Chauvin's actions cause the death of George Floyd? And here's the huge surprise, is that the jury said it did. Now, we're talking about factors that came out at court, which were as part of evidence, like there's the drug factor. There was the fact that he had damage to his heart, arterial damage to his heart, and a 90% blockage of one of his arteries. I mean, my dad actually, before he passed away, had a 90% blockage in one of his veins. It's extreme. That is, at that point, that's critical. I mean, anything can get you at any point. So, that is a very, very, very severe condition, and certainly a condition which nobody should be taking drugs. So you have to say, okay, it wasn't either one of those things. It was decisively Derek Chauvin's knee that did that in that very moment. Right. So that was the 2 hurdles they had to overcome, but the jury said they did.
Well, first of all, prayers up for Papa Andrew, Esquire. Gone but not forgotten. Mr. Ashley 999. I read that one. Verdon Jordan the second. 499 super chat. He said, thanks for all the info. You definitely motivate, fam. That's what's up, homie. Dude, bro, Guyman. $10 super chat said, no question, but big ups to you and Uncle Hotep. I catch the show every week. Shout out to the fam. Shout out to Uncle Hotep. I know he's in the chat getting his coon on. Yo, the likes ain't up. We got to get these likes up. The likes are free. Super chats mean you're not grifting, but these likes are free. You got to hit that like button. I'm going to go ahead and play this clip from Maxine Waters right now, and let's see exactly what she said, because I haven't seen this clip.
It's a good one.
Believe it or not. So let's go ahead and put this on the screen. Let's see what Mama Maxine got to say.
We're looking for a guilty verdict. We're looking for a guilty verdict, and we're looking to see if all of the talk that took place and has been taking place after they saw what happened to George Floyd, if nothing does not happen, then we know that we've got to not only stay in the street, but we've got to fight for justice. But I am very hopeful, and I hope that we're going to get a verdict that is say guilty, guilty, guilty. And if we don't, we cannot go away.
And not just manslaughter, right? I mean...
Oh, no, not manslaughter. No. This is guilty for murder. I don't know whether it's in the first degree, but as far as I'm concerned, it's first degree.
Congresswoman, what happens if we do not get what you just told? What should the people do? What should protesters on the street do?
I didn't hear you.
What happens?
What should protesters do?
Well, we got to stay on the street, and we've got to get more active. We've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make sure that they know that we mean business.
Mama Maxine has spoken. He said, well, somebody asked her, what should the protesters do? That's what the protesters asked. They said, what should we do? And she said, we've got to stay in the street, get more confrontational. What does that mean legally for a congresswoman when she says stuff like that? And are there consequences, and how does that work?
That was a good question. And a lot of people have said, hey, that's something they could censure her on. Heck, they could expel her. I mean, that she actually gave more tangible evidence. I mean, this is a more direct call to violence than you even saw with Trump. I mean, they couldn't, if they had that smoking gun with Trump, they would have definitely gone for it in a much more clear way.
You're talking about the event that happened on the 6th.
Yes.
I said the insurrection.
The insurrection, yes.
Yeah.
By the way, they came up with the report on Officer Sicknick as part of that insurrection. Yeah. They just conclusively proved it was a stroke and not any action of the mob. Yeah.
Right. Wow.
So yeah, exactly. And they were touting that for a while. But like I said, if they had that, and the roles were reversed, the parties were reversed, certainly she'd be dead in the water. She'd be out. But that's clearly not going to happen politically, especially with the way the House and the Senate are controlled. That's not going to happen. But it is grounds for that, because I mean, once again, that is a call to direct violence. I mean, that is actually a call to direct violence. So they could take action on that. Now, granted, there's some First Amendment, and I'm a big proponent of free speech, so I take a generous line on that, and I try to be bipartisan about the freedom of speech. But the danger here is really eroding the right to a free and fair trial, an impartial trial. And also, because of these factors, because they played a factor in possibly how the jury came to a conclusion, that's a grounds for appeal, grounds for this being overturned. Because, if they can say, okay, there's undue influence, there's outside influence on this, that's grounds for it to be potentially overturned in the future. And think about these jurors. A lot of times these jurors, what do they want? They want money. They're just regular Joes, right? This is their chance to write a book. Derek Chauvin, George Floyd jury, jury of the century, modern trial of the century. They make a bunch of money. Let's say as part of their grift, they write that they were influenced by social media, or when they saw the video, they knew they were going to come in there and vote guilty. Boom. Okay. Verdict is overturned. It's appealed, overturned. So there's a lot of potential. And I would say to the people that are pissed off about how it came out, who might not think it's fair, if anybody, is of that position, I'd say they gave a lot of grounds for appeal. And I guarantee you that they're giving them more grounds for appeal. It's almost in a way, Maxine Waters, she actually is helping Derek Chauvin through her ignorance of the law, through her ignorance of the appellate procedure. You know who else? You know who else helped them? The city of Milwaukee. Oh, sorry, the city, not Milwaukee, Minneapolis. I did that. I have a friend in Milwaukee. It always tells me Minneapolis. So Minneapolis, right? Minneapolis came to a settlement with the family of George Floyd during the trial. And this was a huge deal because the judge refused to go through voir dire, which is when they're interviewing the jurors. You have to do that if there's kind of major changes in circumstance to make sure it's a fair and unbiased trial, to make sure that they're not perceiving it the wrong way. So the fact that the city settled with the family looks like the city is admitting to guilt, looks like it's admitting that they did something wrong. And because they did that in the middle of the trial, if the jurors heard about that, it impacted them, another grounds for appeal, because they refused to re-question the jury. Honestly, the state wanted to get this done, and the judge wanted to get this done. You know, a lot of the reason why there was not a mistrial declared, even though there was an ability at multiple points for a mistrial to be declared. And by the way, a mistrial is a do-over. It's not a get-out-of-jail-free card. But there wasn't a mistrial declared because they didn't want this to drag on, because the city didn't want to be threatened by protests, because they just want to move on from this. They're over this. And it's also clear when you look at the case, based on how much money they must have spent on all those professional witnesses. They got the best use of force witnesses in the book, and you know, not of all which agreed with each other, but they got all the witnesses, they threw all the money. And by the way, all those lawyers, the lawyers that came up for the prosecution, most of those were private attorneys. They were not actual state attorneys. I mean, I have, in the past dealt with a lot of state attorneys. They're not paid a lot of money. So they got these private folks coming in here so they can say that their name was on the George Floyd trial and they were the prosecutor. You know, that's why they had like 8 prosecutors, to like 1 defense attorney. I mean, they went all out to get him, and they spent a bunch of money. I mean, not just in the settlement, but just in dealing with this case.
When you say they spent a lot of money, you're talking about the state.
The state, yes, the state.
Yeah, what surprised me was the police force. The police was like, I don't know this nigga. I don't know who Derek Chauvin is. We ain't got nothing to do with this cat. Usually, when you see these cases, the police are usually backing him up. And I think that really hurt his case.
What do they call it? The blue bubble or the blue shield or something like that?
Yeah.
Like it's like something like that. Like when you're behind the blue wall, like the police protect each other like Coda brothers. But that was out the door this time. I mean, like there was like nobody who is even plausibly giving him air cover on the use of force.
Yeah.
And honestly, let's be realistic. There's some extreme uses of force in America. I mean, I'm not a fan of extreme police use of force. I think it should be as tampered down as it can be, and they should try to do as minimal as they can, just in general, because I think that'll create better interactions. But the fact that there was no defense for him is massive, and he was removed from the system. I mean, essentially, this is what happens when the system turns on you, The system has, to this date, protected you, but at this point, it's turned against you. And why I say this is huge and this is precedential is because I think this is what is going to happen all across the U.S. whenever there's a case like this. I think if you're a police officer thinking about going in the police force right now, you have to seriously consider, do these people have my back? Is the state going to have my back? I mean, and honestly, I don't think they will. I think the precedent has been set that if there's, heavy social media coverage on something, you're out there, you're hanging in the wind. They are not going to go to bat for you. And that is a total paradigm shift in terms of the way they go, and I don't know whether I'm interested, do you think whether that's a good thing, bad thing? I mean, we can speculate about it, but it's definitely a shift. We've never seen this before to this degree of officers just totally abandoning him and not coming out and speaking in favor.
Yeah, man. The mob is strong. Cameron Allen has a question for you. He said, do you find Maxine's threats on the jurors suspicious? As in how specific she was with her demands to the jurors, her repetitiveness, and how it was broadcast on TV. In my opinion, she was given a part to play. So that is, if she's saying the verdict, she's talking directly to the jury, right?
Yes. Yep, and she was specific too. She was talking about the number of years. She was talking about a murder charge. That's why the judge called it out. Judge Cahill said it. He said that statement by her specifically. He called her out. He did, because the Chauvin's lawyer, he brought out Nelson. He brought out, oh, there's been a lot of general statements in the media, but called that one out specifically because it was so directed. And that's absolutely right. And that's exactly why she gave him those grounds for appeal, because that's jury intimidation almost. I mean, you're almost threatening them. And in fact, by the way, that might be criminal now in the state of Florida. If Maxine Waters had done that in the state of Florida, that might be criminal based on Florida's new anti-riot law, our combating public disorder law, which Governor DeSantis signed on Monday. I'm doing a video about that that's going to come out tomorrow. But mob intimidation, that's illegal here. That's decisively illegal. And what she did could be considered criminal mob intimidation, because she said, we're going to do this. We're going to stay out here. We're going to get confrontational if you don't give us this specific verdict. To me, that sounds like intimidation. I mean, she could be brought up on charges for that if she was in Florida.
My ADD kicked in. What exactly did Cahill say?
Cahill said that Maxine Waters' statements could be used to overturn the case, to overturn. He
specifically stated that.
He said that. He said that.
In front of the jury?
In front of everybody on national TV. And this is something that's been covered. I think Tim Pool did a little segment on it. And he went on to say that he wishes that politicians would stay out of it. And you could see he was ticked. He was clearly pissed because he knew that this is something that really, really eroded the validity of the judicial system. And that's the issue, is that, it's these people wanting to override the system and use the mob to influence it, but they don't understand how that's backfiring, and it's going to backfire. Now, I'm not going to predict what's going to happen on appeal. There's a lot of political decisions and reasons why maybe the appellate court is scared too, because they're public officials and people can get their information. Maybe they're scared, to overturn this. Maybe they don't overturn this. But what I'm saying is that this has got huge grounds for appeal.